Squid Game is the latest phenomenon to grace the internet. It's a show that's now on Netflix. It's a Korean show, and it's a show that actually came out a few weeks ago, almost a month ago, in fact, in September, but it's taken a while for it to start getting some traction and is now on track to become the most popular show that Netflix has ever had. And I watched it, and I definitely want to talk about it. In this show, we follow a bunch of people who've been brought together from various walks of life, most specifically brought from those walks which are not the best. They're all having some kind of financial trouble and they are in desperate need of money, and this is essentially a second chance for them to do so because they're brought together into a tournament of sorts, which essentially is a bunch of games that they've played in their childhood growing up. And essentially, the objective is simple. This is a second chance. If they win this competition, they'll get a lot of money. Basically enough that they don't have to do another thing for the rest of their lives. The only catch is that as you're playing these games, if you don't follow the rules precisely, or if you don't finish the game in time, you die. And so the bodies pile up as the episodes go on. And in the middle of it, you have characters who are rethinking their entire life philosophy because it involves them making decisions that they may not have had to before. Now you may be thinking, we've seen stuff like this before. If you've watched Battle Royale, for instance, or read the book, or if you've seen the Hunger Games series, you have games that essentially like you're winning more and more because, you're eventually killing the other contestants and making your way to the top. Yes, that's happened, but Squid Game handles it in its own way, and it's trying to tell its own story in the process. Squid Game is actually a pretty awesome show. It's one of my favorite shows I've seen this year, and the best way I can sum it up is that it's 9 episodes and I binged all 9 of them in one sitting. And I started watching it at night, and I finished it at like 5:30 in the morning. I did not sleep, and I was buzzing the entire time, even after I finished the show, because there's so much to unpack in it. And it's a show that, by all accounts, you might think it may not work because it's a concept that's pretty crazy. And the writer and creator of the show himself has talked about it. He also directed the show, has said that he took this idea around for about 10 years and no one was accepting it because it could either work really, really well or it could be a complete disaster. And so it took a while for anyone to finally say yes to this. And I can sort of see why, because it's a very outlandish idea. So many of these characters have come from just the lowest of the low places to the point that they're willing to do anything to make this happen, to be able to win this thing. And some monstrous things happen as a result of it. But the show's real strength lies in that, because on one hand, the games themselves are really great. Once we start off, we have red light, green light, which has been talked about quite a bit on social media. And once that game commences and you see just half the contestants get shot down in almost like one instant because they're just not quite following the rules, is insane. That opening scene with them, that very first game immediately lets you in on the plot. It's like, this is what's happening. And here's where we're gonna go with the rest of the show, and it just gets crazier and crazier from there, and it becomes a lot more desperate. Characters who you may have seen before that who were exhibiting very strong personalities and like, hey, we're gonna do this, and suddenly they're facing scenarios where they're genuinely terrified, and it's like one wrong step means their death, and it leads them to do things that are not necessarily the best. Of course, there are other aspects of the show that are happening at the same time, other things that are being tackled. Of course, you see wealth discrepancy come up quite a bit when you're watching this show. That is a main theme of this, and it plays a huge role in all of the things that are happening here, because in a lot of ways, whatever is happening, that's being seen by some people for their amusement and their entertainment. And it's crazy because one of the games in particular, no spoilers, at one point in time, you just know some spectators are watching this, placing bets on it and all that, and it's a very grotesque game. Like, if you lose that, it's a horrible death basically that's facing you, and that aspect of it, the fact that the show is so unflinching to make that happen is really great. But I want to talk more about those emotional beats, because really that's what makes the show. Because it's one thing to have these games and have these characters basically become fodder to the fact that they're all, so many of them are gonna die. But if you're just gonna have them die, so many of them, then, and just have them be entertaining games, then you don't really care so much about the situations they're in. But the show does a really good job in those moments between games to develop these characters to the point that you don't want any of them to die. And they very expertly do that, because when you're introduced to some of these characters, they are in miserable places, and they're not the best people. They've really gone through the ringer and very much justified in like hating the world and just being complete assholes. And so you find yourself rooting for some of them, even the worst of the worst, because you're like, well, I don't like them, but I also don't want most of them to die. Like, especially not in the ways that are happening in these very unflinching and dark ways. But the fact that the show is able to create some very heartbreaking relationships as a result of it, because you know in the back of your head that not everyone's gonna make it out alive. And so you're almost waiting for the other shoe to drop in every other scene, because you're like, here's this character who I've grown to love. He's not gonna make it to the end, is he? He might not make it to the end either. She might not make it to the end. She might not make it to the end. And so when that is something that is facing you, you're just constantly worried, because you're like, what's gonna do it? What's gonna be that decision which finally breaks everything? And the show managing to keep you on your toes throughout with that particular premise is what makes it so good. Like, it's a testament to just great writing. Let's talk about those performances though, because they're not even acting. I swear to God. Like, I've talked about this a lot of times, but my favorite performances are often the ones where you can't even tell that they were reading off a script, or that it was based on some kind of a, story that was written out on paper. Because it just doesn't feel like that. These characters feel so real, and they feel so like they're in the environments, the world that they live in is so lived. It feels like that these are real people who are fighting for their lives to get this prize money that may not even be worth it at the end of it. Like, you may see all of that in this gigantic piggy bank and think, this is it, this is great. But the fact that the show manages to bring you in on their desperation, and you sort of, even in their most sadistic moments, sometimes understand the choices they're making and why they're making those choices. The fact that the show is able to create that paradox and sometimes have you go to war with it at the same time is what makes it so enthralling to watch. It's for those reasons that the show works as well as it does. I keep saying that, like, the show works as well as it does. It's because of that. There are other subplots going on in the background as well. There's a detective who's trying to figure out what's going on in these games, and he's having to witness a lot of this, and all of that stuff is also really, really interesting. In fact, all the stuff regarding subplots in this were actually a lot better handled than I thought they would be. I was a little worried at first, because there's a tendency at some points in time to create too much that's happening, and then you suddenly don't have that much vested interest in some subplots, and you could have cut that out, or you could have cut that out. And surprisingly, every single thing that's in this, you can't cut it out. It's like every single thing plays a vital role in what happens next, and the other thing, and then the one thing after that. There is one thing that I think could have been maybe developed a little bit more, but I think they're saving that for maybe a season 2 if they do it, because the show does end with a potential for that to happen. But I don't know if they're actually going to do that. It's one of those things where they spent some time on it, and I thought, that could go somewhere. Like, I'm just curious as to what that's about, but then it doesn't really go past a certain point. Maybe that's it. I think if I was to really go in looking for flaws with Squid Game, like if I had to, and I've been thinking over this for about a day now, I guess maybe that would be it. Like, just a couple of things could have used a little more expansion, but overall it didn't take away from the point of it. It didn't like really ruin the show for me in any major ways or anything like that, or break it. At the end of the day, it still told a very compelling story with some heart-wrenching moments, with some really well-developed characters, some great writing and direction, great score too, very haunting stuff that you hear, gorgeous cinematography as well. I saw this in 4K, which I guess most people are seeing it in nowadays, and with Dolby Vision and all that, and it looked incredible. I think this is one of those things where it's like justified, all of the hype that's going on around it. And I highly recommend Squid Game if you get the chance to see it. I'm gonna give Squid Game an A. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Look forward to more reviews very soon. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the movies.